I'd always heard that life changes in seconds, but I never took that phrase seriously until that day. It was an ordinary afternoon, or at least it seemed so. The kind of afternoon where you're so used to the routine that nothing, absolutely nothing, suggests that something unexpected is about to happen. I was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, thinking about the tasks I still needed to do, when I heard the doorbell ring. The sound was so intense, so urgent, that it made my heart race, even before I took my first step towards the door. At first, I thought it was my husband, who had the annoying habit of forgetting his keys almost every day. Or maybe a neighbor, someone selling something, a late delivery. Nothing that justified the shiver that ran down my spine. But that shiver came, and it came strong, as if my body knew before my mind that something was wrong. Every step I took to the door seemed to echo, as if the floor were too heavy, as if the silence of the house had become dense. When I finally reached the doorknob, I took a deep breath. I don't know why, but I felt I needed to prepare myself. Maybe it was because of the way the doorbell rang, maybe because of the silence that followed, as if the world were holding its breath along with me. I turned the doorknob slowly, and the door opened with a creak that never bothered me, until that moment. And then I saw her, my husband's ex, standing before my door, like a ghost from the past I never wanted to revisit. Her face was completely wet with tears, her eyes red, her nose swollen. She was trembling. It wasn't just crying, it was despair. Her breathing was short, rapid, as if she had just run an emotional marathon. For a second, my brain simply froze. My mouth opened, but no words came out. It was as if everything around me had disappeared, and only she remained, there, staring at me, silently begging for something I didn't yet understand. The first thing I felt wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't insecurity. It was fear. A fear so deep it seemed to spring from my stomach and spread throughout my entire body. I knew that woman only from the fragments my husband chose to tell me, and none of them were positive. For him, she was a closed chapter, an old story, an unstable, problematic, exaggerated person, a shadow he had left behind. And suddenly, that shadow was at my door, crying as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She opened her mouth to try to speak, but her voice failed her. Her hand gripped the door frame, as if she needed support to avoid falling. I had never seen anyone so vulnerable, so broken, and, in that instant, something inside me changed. My first reaction, to close the door, protect my peace, avoid conflict, vanished. A second reaction came, stronger, more instinctive, to understand what was happening. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice so weak it seemed about to disappear. It was as if the world stopped, as if that simple phrase carried something much bigger than a request for entry. She didn't just want to enter my house, she wanted to enter, for a few moments, my life. And worse, she wanted to show me something I didn't yet know, something she believed to be too urgent, too important, too dangerous to be ignored. I took a deep breath, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. It wasn't normal for her husband's ex to show up at her door like that. It wasn't normal for someone to come crying, desperate, without warning for no apparent reason. It wasn't normal for her body to tremble like that if she wasn't carrying real suffering. And then, in that heavy silence, I entered a state of alert that I had never felt before. Because at that moment, standing before that broken woman at my door, I realized a truth that chilled me to the bone. At that moment, I felt like my whole life was about to turn upside down. That sentence wasn't just a thought. It was a premonition. Something inside me knew, even before she said a word, that nothing would ever be the same after that encounter. And even so, even with fear pounding within me, even hearing my husband's voice echoing in my head telling me to stay away, not to trust her, not to get involved, I took a step back and opened the door. I let her in, and without knowing it, I let the truth in along with it. When she took her first step into my house, my whole body reacted before my mind. I felt my hands sweat, my legs grow heavy, and a strange tightness in my chest, as if I were inviting danger in. It was as if two versions of me were waging a silent war inside my head, one telling me to listen, embrace, and understand, and the other screaming to close the door, protect my peace, and not let my husband's past invade my present. For a few seconds, which felt like hours, I stood there, frozen between the hallway and the open door, staring at her while trying to control my breathing. Something inside me told me that allowing this was madness. After all, What kind of woman shows up at her ex's current wife's house crying, trembling without warning? What kind of situation starts like this without ending in suffering? I wasn't ready for any revelation, not at that moment, not on that day that should have been normal. My first impulse was to send her away, not out of malice, but for self-preservation. From the beginning of my relationship, my husband portrayed his ex as a problematic figure. Every fight they had, every disagreement, every breakup and reconciliation, everything always carried accusations that made her the villain of the story. And I accepted it, because that's how many of us do. We believe in the person we love. We trust the narrative they tell. We assume that their past doesn't belong to us, that we don't need to question it, that we just need to move on. But at the same time, I remembered small details that never made much sense. Poorly told stories. Sudden mood swings when I asked about their relationship. Shallow explanations. Long silences. That uncomfortable way he looked away when I brought up the subject. I always found it strange, but I never wanted to delve into it. After all, who wants to resurrect their husband's past? Who wants to compare themselves to their ex? Who wants to open a door he clearly wanted to keep closed? I felt suffocated by the weight of it all. It was as if every little bit of old insecurity resurfaced all at once. I remembered the beginning of our marriage, when I still felt a silly, natural jealousy, the kind you try to hide, but that always slips out in questions like, "Do you still talk? Has she tried to contact you? Why did you break up?" He always answered too quickly, as if he had memorized every phrase. "She's crazy. I don't have contact with her. She made things up. It was impossible to live with her." And now she was there, in my office, completely broken. Everything he had said about her seemed out of place in that moment. The person standing before me didn't seem manipulative, self-serving, or unstable. She seemed hurt, scared. And that only intensified my internal conflict because, for the first time, something inside me whispered, what if he didn't tell everything? What if he hid important parts? What if he was never honest about his past? I sat on the sofa with a mix of emotions I could barely organize. A part of me felt hatred for this situation happening. Another part felt sorry for her. Another, fear of what she was about to say. And worst of all, there was a part of me, the quietest and deepest, that recognized that pain. A pain that only those who have been deceived, manipulated, or left aside know. She sat down in front of me. Her hands were still trembling. Her eyes sought mine as if asking for permission to continue. And I realized that the simple fact that she was there, vulnerable like that, was already shattering the version my husband had always presented. Something didn't add up. Something was wrong. And to my surprise, most of my tension came not from her, but from what I was beginning to suspect about him. I leaned forward slightly, as if my body were being pulled by the need to understand. But my mind still resisted. I remembered all the times my husband had said, "If she ever tries to get close to you, don't listen to her. She's going to make things up. She always wanted to end my life." Those phrases kept repeating in my head like a warning, but also like a shadow. Because at that moment, it seemed like he was afraid, not of her, but of what she might reveal. The tension grew so intense within me that it felt like it filled the air in the room. I was torn between loyalty to my husband and the need to hear her side of the story, between the desire to protect my emotional stability and the feeling that my entire life might be built on a cracked foundation. And then, for the first time that day, I realized it wasn't just her who was trembling. My hands were trembling too. Because the truth, whatever it might be, was about to come out. And I didn't know if I had the strength to hear it, but a voice inside me, the one that speaks in important moments, told me, sometimes running away hurts more than finding out. I took a deep breath and said, "Speak, I'm listening." And in that instant, the world around me began to change. She looked around the room as if she were in enemy territory. It wasn't just shame, it was fear, a fear I recognized, even without yet knowing what she was running from. The kind of fear that makes a person shrink into their own body, as if wanting to disappear, but at the same time knowing they can't retreat because something bigger is pushing them forward. She sat on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to run away at any moment. Her hands gripped the fabric of her pants, her shoulders hunched, her breathing completely erratic. With each attempt to speak, sobs choked her throat, as if the words were too heavy to come out. For a moment, I almost said, "Breathe, everything's okay." But I knew that everything wasn't all right, not for her and not for me. Then she slowly looked up, her eyes welling with tears, and said the first sentence that began to dismantle everything I thought I knew about my husband. I didn't come here to cause trouble. The way she said it affected me. There was no irony, no threat. There was a plea. It was as if she knew that her mere presence was already a problem, already a conflict, already an open wound, and yet she had no other choice but to be there. She swallowed hard and continued, her voice choked with emotion. I hesitated a lot before coming, she said, avoiding my gaze. I know I'm the last person you'd want to see. I know what he said about me. I know how he portrays me to people. And at that moment, something inside me snapped, because I had never told her what my husband said. I had never repeated the stories, never commented on anything directly with her. But somehow she knew. She knew he called her exaggerated, unstable, unbalanced. She knew he always told the version where she was the crazy one, and he was the poor guy who suffered at her hands. And that made me think, if she knew this, it was perhaps because it wasn't the first time he had done this. She took a deep breath, placed both hands on her knees, as if preparing to dive into deep water, and continued, I'm not here to try and bring him back. I don't want trouble. I don't want to fight. I don't want to destroy your marriage. I'm not that kind of person, even if he made you believe otherwise. My heart skipped a beat. She spoke with such sincere, raw pain that it was difficult to reconcile that image with the version my husband described. I was beginning to realize that I had two very different stories about the same person, and that one of them was a lie. But I still didn't know which one. She ran her hand over her face, trying to dry the tears, but others were already falling in their place. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, as if each memory that surfaced in her mind also brought a weight to her chest. I'm here, she tried to say, but her voice failed her. Because something from the past has returned, and this time, it's not just about me, it's about you too. It was as if the air in the room had vanished. I settled back in the armchair, feeling a sudden chill in my arms, as if someone had opened an invisible window. The way she said, it's about you too, made me feel a kind of threat that didn't seem aggressive, but inevitable, like a wave you see coming in the distance, slowly, and you know that when it arrives, there's no escaping it. What about that thing from the past? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my hands were already intertwined in a nervous grip. She took a deep breath and looked at her own hands, as if carefully choosing each word that would follow. I thought time had solved it all, she began. I thought I'd buried the story. But some things don't just disappear because we want to forget. Some things come back, especially when the person who caused it all keeps repeating the same mistakes, as if nothing happened. She looked up and this time stared directly at me. There was no longer just pain. There was indignation. There was exhaustion. There was a kind of urgency, as if she were late in telling me something I should have known a long time ago. I know you love him, she continued, her voice softer. I loved him too, more than I should have, to the point of accepting things that shame me now, to the point of believing excuses I knew were flimsy, to the point of blaming myself for actions that weren't mine. And I know that if I just come here and say, he's not who he seems, you won't believe me, because I wouldn't believe you either, in your place. She took another deep breath, as if preparing to walk through an inner door, an emotional door she had kept closed for years. But something happened recently, something that made me realize he's doing to you what he did to me. Maybe in a more subtle way, maybe in a more sophisticated way, but it's the same pattern. And I haven't been able to sleep since I understood that. I haven't been able to stay quiet anymore. I needed to... Her voice broke. I needed to warn you. My heart began to pound so hard it felt like it was echoing in my own head. The mixture of anxiety, fear, and denial was almost suffocating. Part of me wanted to get up, tell her to leave, say that my life was fine, that my marriage was in order, that none of this made sense. But another part, very silently, pulled back scenes I had pushed to the back of my mind. Little lies from my husband, strange explanations, abrupt mood swings, unimportant secrets that kept piling up. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a deep breath for the 1,000th time, and then uttered the phrase that triggered both curiosity and fear at the same time. I need to tell you the truth about your husband. The way she spoke the truth wasn't light. It was heavy, almost sacred, as if she had carried it alone for years and was finally finding someone who also had the right to know. My throat went dry. No one tells the truth about someone if it's something simple, trivial, or insignificant. No one endures years of silence, confronts their current spouse, humiliates themselves at someone else's doorstep, exposes themselves to embarrassment and judgment over something irrelevant. In that second, I realized that up until then, I had only heard his version of the truth, never hers, never the truth from an outsider. And worse, I had never stopped to think that perhaps there was a third truth, the reality of the facts, independent of each person's version. The room was quieter than ever. The ticking of the clock seemed louder. The distant noise of the street faded away. Only the two of us remained, sitting facing each other with an invisible line of pain and destiny connecting our stories. I could feel the weight of what was about to be said. It felt like standing on the edge of an abyss, looking down, knowing that after hearing it, I couldn't simply return to my previous innocence. She took another deep breath, as if she were about to confess to a crime, and murmured, "He is not the man you think you know." And at that exact moment, I was certain of one thing: my life, my marriage, my view of the man I shared my bed with. All of that was about to be tested, dismantled, and rebuilt, based on the next words that would come out of her mouth. And whether I liked it or not, I was ready to listen. Or at least, I needed to be. When she said she needed to tell me the truth, something inside me opened up, not willingly, but from the impact. It was as if that sentence had unlocked old drawers in my mind, and everything my husband had ever said about her came rushing back like a movie, a vivid flashback I never asked to see. And there, listening to her tremble before me, I realized how much those stories had shaped my view of a woman I had never heard directly from before. My entire opinion of her had been built by my husband's hands, words, and emotional filter. I remembered the first times I asked him about his past. It was during one of our first romantic dinners, when we were still in that phase of intense passion, light discoveries, and conversations that deepened unexpectedly. I wanted to understand who he had been before me, what he had experienced, who he had loved. And that's when her name came up for the first time, laden not with sadness, not with longing, but with irritation. "Ah, she was crazy," he said with that expression of someone who wants to end the matter quickly. And I, inexperienced, in love, wanting to please, just left it at that. In the following days, as the relationship progressed, more details emerged, or rather, fragments, because he never told the whole story. Always loose. Pieces, always quick versions, always comments mixed with laughter, impatient sighs, and that aura of, "I don't want to talk about it, but if you insist." The word dramatic, it happened in our third month together. I asked him why they had broken up, and he gave that awkward smile that only appears when someone is hiding more than trying to explain. "She made a drama out of everything," he said, fiddling with his phone. "Any argument would turn into a storm." At the time, I didn't even question it. Almost every woman has been accused of being dramatic at some point, and I, wanting to seem mature, balanced, superior, let it slip through the cracks of my confidence. Little did I know that often when a man calls a woman dramatic, what he really wants is to avoid taking responsibility for his part in the problems. Then came the obsessed. He said that, even after the breakup, she insisted on sending messages, creating situations, showing up at his house, and making up. Accusations. He spoke as if he were talking about a persecution. And again, I believed him. It's easy to believe when you've never heard the other side of the story. It's easy to believe when the person you love claims to be a victim. It's easy to believe when you see no reason to doubt. And the worst of all, he never got over the relationship. That phrase echoed in my mind like an invisible warning, a notice that shaped my stance from the very beginning. He said she kept bringing up the past, trying to start a conversation, trying to get closer, trying to resolve things that were already dead. And I, without realizing it, was creating within myself an emotional portrait of this woman I had never seen. Unbalanced, needy, cottage, problematic, someone who couldn't accept an ending. And when I finally saw a picture of her for the first time, on an old social media platform he had forgotten about, all I saw was what he had put in my head. The image matched his narrative, and I didn't even realize I was already conditioned to think that way. Over time, anything involving her made me feel uneasy, not because of who she was, but because of the way he talked about her. It was as if he had constructed a complete persona, carefully molded to make me feel safe with him and despise her. And it worked. I never questioned it. I never compared versions. I never stopped to think if she also had her own pain, her own story, her own reasons. But at that moment in the room, seeing her completely broken, nothing about her attitude matched the words he had used for years. She didn't seem crazy. It didn't seem dramatic. She didn't seem obsessed. and she certainly didn't seem like someone who hadn't gotten over the relationship. In fact, she seemed like someone who had tried so hard for so long that she was now emotionally exhausted. A bitter sensation began to form in my throat. What if the version I've heard for years has been manipulated? What if he had only told the convenient parts? What if he had erased important nuances, reversed blame, rewritten history? Because there, looking at that woman sitting on my couch, everything I had believed in began to seem fragile, like a house of cards about to collapse at the slightest touch. I realized that the story I knew wasn't the true story. It was his story. And for the first time, I felt ashamed. Ashamed of having judged someone I had never met. Ashamed of having blindly believed in someone just because I loved them. Ashamed of having assumed she was the problem, when perhaps, just perhaps, she had been the first victim. And now, with her standing there before me, staring at my heavy silence, I knew I was about to hear the version they never told me, the version he tried to hide, the version that could change everything. And I was inevitably about to find out which of these two stories, his or hers, was the true one, and which one would destroy the other. She remained silent for a few seconds, seconds that seemed far too long, almost torturous, the kind of silence that precedes news no one wants to hear. Her hands continued to tremble, and she clenched her fingers so tightly that the knuckles turned white. Then, she took a deep breath, as if preparing to plunge into icy water, and finally uttered the phrase that changed everything. "You don't know who the man you married really is." Those words pierced the room like lightning, not because they were aggressive, but because they were spoken with such genuine, ancient, and profound pain that there was no room to interpret them as envy, jealousy, or provocation. It wasn't that. It was trauma. It was survival. It was a warning. My first instinct was to deny it, to push the phrase away from me like someone brushing away a flame with their hand, but it continued before I could react. "I know you believe him. You believe every word, every story, every explanation. I know, because one day I believed him too. The way," she said, "one day, I believed too," made my stomach drop. It was as if she were offering me a mirror, and I saw myself reflected there, naive, in love, trusting completely in someone who perhaps had never been transparent with me. She adjusted her body on the sofa, still struggling to control her emotions. But now there was something different, determination. It seemed that after years, she had finally found the courage to speak. "He wasn't that caring, kind, sensible, balanced person," she said, her voice breaking. "He seemed that way at the beginning, always at the beginning. He knows how to charm, how to engage, how to win people over, but then he changes. It's like he takes off a mask." I felt my throat go dry. Mask. That word kept echoing inside me like a grim warning. "When we started dating," she continued, "he did everything for me. He called me all the time, worried about every detail, showered me with compliments, but little by little, things started to get strange. He began to control small aspects of my life, things I didn't even notice right away." She ran her hand over her face, wiping away tears that insisted on falling. "He would tell me how I should dress, who I should or shouldn't talk to. He said some people were no good, that others had ulterior motives. He always justified everything with jealousy, as if it were exaggerated love. I thought it was cute at first. Later, I found it suffocating. But he always found a way to turn the tables. Always. My whole body shivered. That was a familiar narrative. Not from personal experience, but because I had read about relationships like that. I had seen similar stories, but I never imagined I could be living one myself. "When I tried to talk to him," she said, her gaze lost in thought, "he would change his mind. Everything changed. He was a master at reversing situations. He made me feel guilty for things he himself had done. He would cry, hug me, say I was all he had, say he couldn't live without me. And I believed him. I believed everything. I thought he needed me. I thought I had to fix everything, that only I could cure him." And then she added a sentence that sent chills down my spine. "He's charming, until he isn't anymore." My heart raced, because deep down, I recognized that charm. I had been won over by him in the same way. He knew exactly what to say, how to act, how to behave in front of people, how to show affection at the right time, how to present himself as the perfect man. But I had never seen the other side, the side she was looking at. "He never yells," she said, leaning forward slightly. "He doesn't need to yell. He knows how to manipulate without raising his voice. He knows how to make you feel wrong even when you're right. He knows how to make you doubt yourself. He knows how to distort reality, so subtly that one day you wake up completely lost, thinking you've gone mad. She clenched her hands, remembering something. He did this to me. I thought I was exaggerating, always exaggerating. He said I was too sensitive, that I made up stories in my head, that I invented problems, until I started to believe it. I started apologizing for things I hadn't even done. I started to feel that if I left his life, he would fall apart. And, in fact, the one who was falling apart was me. My chest felt heavy. Each of her sentences seemed to fit pieces that I didn't know were missing in my marriage. She took a deep breath, trying not to break down. And there's more. He has this way about him, a way of hiding things. Little things at first, things that seem irrelevant, little lies, slips of the tongue, information he forgot to mention. And when you find out, he always has a perfect excuse. Always. He never panics. He's never at a loss for words. He has a prepared speech, as if it were already rehearsed. I swallowed hard. I had already understood some of these omissions, but I always let them pass, because he seemed convincing. Very convincing. He cheated on me for months before I found out, she said suddenly, her voice low. And when I found out, he made it seem like it was my fault. He said I was distant, cold, stressed, difficult to deal with, that he only sought affection because I wasn't giving it anymore. And you know the worst part? I believed him. He convinced me that I was to blame for him cheating on me. A heavy silence filled the room. She wiped away her tears, took a deep breath, and finished. I'm not saying all this because I want to destroy your marriage. I'm saying it because I know what it's like to fall into that trap. I know what it's like to think you're living a fairy tale, while someone is pulling the strings behind you to control you without you realizing it. That last sentence pierced my soul, because at that moment, a terrible truth began to germinate within me. What if the man I thought I knew was just the version of himself he chose to show? What if his ex-girlfriend was standing before me not to cause trouble, but to prevent me from going through the same problems she did? What if the past she said had returned was already affecting my present without me realizing it? When she finally looked up again, she whispered, "You don't know the man you married." I realized it wasn't a threat. It was a warning, a cry for help stuck in time, a woman trying to save another from a version of suffering she knew all too well. And there, for the first time, I allowed myself to feel a fear that I had ignored for years. What if she was telling the truth? Just when I thought the room was heavy enough, heavy with memories, confessions, old fears, cutting words, she made a slow, almost ritualistic movement. She reached for the bag that had fallen beside her on the sofa. The sound of the zipper opening seemed to echo throughout the room, as if amplified by the oppressive silence that enveloped us. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something told me, with frightening clarity, that whatever was inside that bag wasn't small. It wasn't light. It wasn't something I could ignore. She hesitated before taking anything out of there. Her fingers trembled so much that it seemed difficult to even hold whatever she was picking up. Her face lost even more color. I almost asked her to stop, almost. But the truth is, part of me needed to see. I needed to confirm. I needed to understand. Because words, however harsh they might be, were still just that, words. But one piece of, evidence. One test changes everything. She took a deep breath, plunging her hand into her bag as if she knew she was about to turn a chapter in her own story. And then she pulled something out. A thick envelope, yellowed at the edges, full of folded papers. At that moment, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. I recognized that type of envelope. It looked familiar, too personal, too old, too overloaded. But she didn't give me time to think. He opened the envelope carefully, as if handling evidence of a crime, and took out the first thing, a stack of printed sheets. "These," she said, her voice faltering, "are old messages, conversations he deleted. At least he deleted them from his own phone. I didn't delete them." She handed me the first sheet with such hesitation that I realized she needed courage just to extend her arm. When I took it, my hands automatically went cold. I looked at the page, and the first line I read made my stomach churn. They were messages from him. From my husband. Messages sent to her while she was already with me. Affectionate, manipulative, calculated messages, on dates and times that coincided with moments when he swore he was working, resolving something, going through emotional difficulties. My heart started beating so hard it felt like I'd swallowed a hammer. The room spun. The air disappeared. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, her voice breaking. Before I could react, she grabbed another piece of paper, screenshots of recent conversations not from years ago. Recent, weeks ago, days ago. His messages included indirect hints, testing boundaries, sending ambiguous signals, insinuating doubts, asking for emotional help, saying that life with you was difficult, but that he didn't want to hurt you. The type of message that shows someone preparing the ground, creating loopholes, making excuses. I felt my hands trembling. My legs went weak. My mouth went dry. But she wasn't finished yet. She picked up her phone and opened the gallery. She cursed her own hand for shaking so much, and finally selected something. When she turned the screen towards me, the world stopped. Audio files. Audio recordings of him. I recognized the voice immediately. That calm, affectionate, controlled voice. But the words were completely different from the ones he used to say to me. They had another intention, another tone, another purpose. In the first audio recording, he said that he was lost, that he didn't know what he felt, and that sometimes he thought he had made a mistake by moving on too fast. I was paralyzed. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But she opened the next audio, and that one was even worse. His voice said, with frightening calm, "You know I've always loved you more than her. She doesn't understand my needs. She's always been complicated. You were different." I felt something inside me tear, as if someone was pulling at my chest from the inside. "I kept all this to myself because," she tried to say, swallowing back tears, "because I knew that one day he would do to someone else what he did to me. And when I realized that person was you, I couldn't stay silent." She went back to the envelope and took out the last thing, a folded document, which seemed to be the heaviest of them all, not because of the role, but because of what it represented. "That," she said with a distressed sigh, "is something he'll never admit, but you need to see it." She placed the document in my hand. I carefully unfolded it, and when I saw what it was, it felt like being hit by an icy wave. A contract, financial, signed by her and by him. The type of contract that didn't exist in our relationship. The kind of debt he swore he never had. The type of problem he said she invented. The kind of story he always told only halfway. But there it was, on paper, with dates, with his signature, with financial transactions that matched periods when he swore he was helping his own family, when in reality he was using their money, manipulating her, exploring it. When I realized the extent of it, my whole body went cold. I felt my world crumble, both physically and emotionally. She said, her voice weaker than ever. "He left me in a financial hole for years. He promised he'd pay everything back. He never did. He always had excuses. And when I started demanding payment, he turned the story against me." I looked at her, finally understanding everything. She wasn't showing jealousy, not obsession, not drama. She was showing what was left of her life after him. And now, she was afraid I would be next. The envelope, the messages, the audio recordings, the document, it was all real. And I knew it was real because he always had overly convincing answers. Stories that are too contrived, explanations that were too quick. And at that moment, looking at everything scattered on the table, I had the most devastating feeling of all. The man I thought. I knew. It didn't exist. And this was no longer just a suspicion. It was proof. Cold. Solid. Undeniable. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. Because at that moment, I realized, if all of that was true, so my entire life was built on a lie. When I finished looking at each document, each printout, each audio recording, I felt as if a weight of tons had been placed on my chest. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe properly. It was as if the air in the room had become too thick to pass through my throat. And it was at that exact moment, when I was completely paralyzed, trying to process everything, that she lowered her gaze and said, in a voice so soft and yet so devastated, "I've been in your shoes too." That wasn't just a sentence. It was a bridge, a direct connection between her pain and mine, as if two stories, separated by time, were finally meeting at a point of truth, a point he had always tried to prevent. She took a deep breath, as if preparing to reopen old wounds. She wiped away tears with her sleeve, but more were already falling. There was no vanity there, no pride, only pain, raw, honest, inevitable pain. "When I say I've been in your shoes," she murmured. It's because I know exactly what it's like to believe he's everything you've ever wanted. I know what it's like to feel like you've finally found someone who understands you, someone who accepts you, who values you, who makes you feel special. I know that feeling of relief, that peace that seems to come after difficult relationships. He does that. He knows how to do that. He always has. She looked at me with such a deep gaze that I felt my own tears threatening to fall. It was impossible not to feel that connection between us, a silent connection, built on the same kind of wound. At first, I thought he was perfect, she continued. He took care of me, he cooked for me, he hugged me in a way that I thought only someone who truly loves you can. He said exactly the words I needed to hear. No matter the problem, he always had a solution. But what I didn't know back then was that he also had another version of himself, a version that only appears when he feels he has already won you over. She made air quotes with her fingers, as if the word conquered were something bitter, something she still had difficulty pronouncing. One day he started to change, she said more quietly, and I swear I didn't notice it at first. It was subtle, so subtle it seemed normal. First he started, saying that some of my friendships weren't good for me. Then he started criticizing me for little things, the way I cleaned the house, the way I spoke, the way I dressed. He said he wanted to help me be better. She paused, a long pause, those that speak louder than 1,000 sentences. And when I realized it, she said, her voice trembling, I wasn't making any decisions without thinking about what he would say. I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. I had lost my sparkle, my strength, my opinions. I had become a shadow of myself, and yet I thought it was my fault. The silence in the room grew so heavy it seemed to have a shape. I didn't move, neither did she. Her pain seemed to travel through the air as something visible, palpable. I felt it in my chest as if it were my own. And when he finally betrayed me, she continued, her voice breaking, it was as if what little was left of me crumbled, but worse than the betrayal was the way he turned everything against me. He said I was paranoid, that I was imagining things, that I was too insecure, that I was difficult to love, and I believed him. I truly believed him. She ran her hand over her face, now trembling uncontrollably. I spent years trying to understand why I wasn't enough, she said, in an almost childlike whisper. I spent years wondering what I did wrong. I spent years blaming myself for everything, until I realized, too late, that it wasn't me. It never was. Those last words touched something inside me that I didn't even know was there. It was as if she had placed her hand inside my heart and pointed exactly to where my own pain began. She looked me in the eyes, finally lifting her face completely, vulnerable, yet firm. When I saw you with him, she said, I recognized that sparkle in your eyes. I recognized the way you smiled when you talked about him. I recognized the confidence you thought you had. I saw the version of him that won you over, and I was afraid, because I knew that, if he didn't change, you would go through the same things I went through, maybe in a different way, maybe with a different intensity, but it would be the same pattern. She took a deep breath, with difficulty. I'm not here as an enemy. I'm not here as someone who wants to destroy your marriage. I'm here as someone who used to be you, someone who believed the same words, someone who also thought she had found the right man, until she realized she was living someone else's nightmare. And then, for the first time since she came into my house, she gave me a small smile, a sad smile, a tired smile, a smile from someone who knows exactly what it means to survive someone you loved more than you should have. I didn't come for myself, she said, placing her hand on her chest. I came for you. That sentence destroyed me, because at that moment I realized that she wasn't just sharing her pain, she was offering empathy. She was reaching out so that I wouldn't sink in the same place she had, to climb out of alone. And for the first time, I felt that, even in the face of the chaos that was about to take over my life, I wasn't completely alone. Two women, two hearts broken by the same person, two stories that, although different, had finally connected at a point of profound understanding, at a point of shared pain. And in that instant, everything changed inside me. Because when one woman looks into another's eyes and says, I've been in your shoes too, she's not just telling her story. She is saying, I know how much it hurts, and I won't let you go through this alone. It was only when she finished speaking, when her pain met mine, that something inside me began to reorganize itself, as if my mind were desperately trying to assemble a puzzle I never realized was incomplete. And, as each piece fell into place, I began to realize what was impossible to ignore. Everything he said about her made sense, but not in the way he described it. It was as if I were seeing two different images of the same painting. His version, the one I'd heard for years, was the perfect, smooth, polished painting. Her version was the original, before the retouching, before the emotional makeup he applied to every detail. And for the first time, I realized that he wasn't telling stories. He told pre-packaged narratives, piece by piece. The first lie debunked. She's crazy. When he said that, I imagined an unstable, out-of-control, exaggerated woman. But now, looking at her, shattered, but lucid, I realized that that word was a tool, a weapon, a way to invalidate everything she could one day say about him. He didn't need to prove she was crazy. He just needed to repeat it often enough for me to believe him. And it worked. Ultimately, if someone is crazy, nothing that person says matters. No accusation carries any weight. No pain has any legitimacy. Now I could see with cruel clarity what he had done. He had planted that image from the beginning to protect me. From the truth, not hers. Share. The second lie. She's dramatic. This has always been my favorite. I used that word in my mind whenever I thought of her, even though I didn't know her. Dramatic, exaggerated, theatrical. But when she spoke to me, with painful pauses, with heavy words, with the weight of experiences that cannot be invented, I understood that it wasn't drama. It was trauma. And trauma is no exaggeration. Trauma is a consequence from someone, and that someone was the same man I slept with every night. The third lie. She was obsessed with me. Here the psychological shift was instantaneous, because while she was talking, I realized that every time he described her as obsessed, he said it with a certain tone of superiority, as if she were irresistible, desired, pursued. But now, I saw a different story. She wasn't obsessed with him. She was trapped in a cycle he had created. He would make promises, then distance himself, then return affectionately, then disappear, then blame her, then ask for forgiveness, then repeat the whole thing. This is not obsession. This is emotional dependency created through manipulation. A pattern. The same pattern that I was beginning to recognize in small things he did to me. Subtle comments, sudden changes, phrases that made me feel guilty for no reason, manipulated silences, minor omissions that seemed harmless. Up until then, I had interpreted all of this as just couple stuff. But now it looked like a script. Not hers. Share. The fourth lie. She never got over the relationship. That was the one that hurt the most. Because everything she did, absolutely everything, showed the opposite. She didn't come there to ask for him back. He didn't come here to cause trouble. He didn't come to destroy my life. She came to save mine. She came to stop me from falling into the same trap, that I would go through the same emotional destruction. It was the same type of manipulation that took her years to identify, accept, overcome, and was still healing from. And then finally, it clicked. He didn't say that she hadn't gotten over it. He said that she didn't shut up. Those who haven't gotten over it, it was him. Because when someone leaves scars on another person, that person carries parts of them forever. And he knew it. She knew she had seen what he was really like. Did you know that if I ever listened to her, everything would crumble? Therefore, he needed to transform her into an imaginary enemy, to prevent her from becoming what she truly was, a witness. And then came the turning point, the twist that changes the whole story. As she spoke, I began to remember specific moments from my relationship with him. The times when I questioned something and he would say, "You're misunderstanding." The times when I asked for explanations and he replied, "You're too sensitive. It's all in your head." The times he turned the problem against me with perfect phrases like, "I'm only asking you this because I love you too much." The times he would disappear emotionally, leaving me uneasy, but then come back affectionate, making me believe that the instability was my fault, not his. The times he talked about his ex-girlfriends as if they were all crazy, jealous, and overly intense. At that moment, I realized something that made my chest clench. I was living my own versions of the stories she had already lived. Not identical, but eerily similar. He simply adapted. The method. The strategy changed. He adjusted the mask, and for the first time, I felt the manipulation not as suspicion, but as reality, a reality that could not be denied, because she was there, in front of me, alive, breathing, recounting step by step a psychological pattern that only those who have lived through it recognize. I felt the tears welling up, unable to hold them back. It was as if I were two people at the same time, the woman who believed in her husband, and the woman who finally saw the man behind him. This emotional clash, the version I had in my head and the truth that was unfolding before me, was so intense that it took my breath away. She gently placed her hand on my arm and said, "You're not the first, and if I weren't here, you wouldn't be the last one either." That phrase exploded inside me, because at that moment, I realized something devastating. I wasn't being chosen. I was being repeated. It wasn't love. It was standard. It wasn't destiny. It was a cycle. And there, faced with that revelation, I knew, with a clarity that almost hurt, that it was impossible to remain the same woman after that moment. The psychological shift was complete. What I believed about my marriage was dead. Now, only the truth remained. The next step would not be easy, but it was necessary. After all the pieces began to fall into place, each lie dismantled, each piece of evidence presented, each wound exposed, a different kind of silence filled the room. It was no longer the silence of shock, nor the heavy silence of shared grief. It was another kind of silence, the silence that precedes the ultimate truth, the one that changes everything, that explains everything, that finally makes everything make sense. She took a deep breath, straightened up on the sofa, and wiped her face with both hands. It was clear she was gathering every last bit of courage she had left. And then, her voice trembling, but with a firmness she hadn't shown before, she said, "I didn't come here just to tell you what he did to me. I came because he started doing to you exactly what he did to me." The phrase hit me like an unexpected punch, a hard, direct impact, impossible to avoid. My whole body felt like it was frozen. She continued, looking into my eyes as if she were holding my soul in her hands. "I saw the signs," she said, almost in a whisper. "He's repeating the pattern. And when I realized that, I panicked, because I know how this ends. I know what comes next. I know how he changes. I know where this leads." My heart started racing. A tightness gripped my chest, because deep down, a part of me already knew exactly which signs she was talking about. She paused, took a deep breath, and then continued, now in a tone that mixed pain with a kind of moral responsibility. "I tried to distance myself from his life for years. I tried to move on, to rebuild everything he destroyed. But when I saw the way he started talking about you, I recognized it. He talked about me the same way, the same intonation, the same phrases, the same arguments. It was like hearing an echo of a past that destroyed me. That was like hearing the universe split in two." She began to list the signs, one by one, and each one of them was an emotional stab. "He started by calling you special, didn't he?" she said. I nodded silently. "Did he tell you that he's never loved anyone like he loves you?" I nodded again. "Did he tell you sad stories from his childhood, stories that made you feel you needed to protect him?" I nodded for the third time. "Did he start subtly complaining about some people in your life, saying that you were too good for certain friendships?" I nodded, my heart racing. "Has he ever made a mistake and made it seem like you were putting too much pressure on him, even when your demands were minimal?" I swallowed hard and nodded again. She closed her eyes, as if reliving a difficult memory, and concluded, "It was the same for me, too. Exactly the same. It creates emotional dependence. He creates a bond that looks like love, but it's not love. It's about control." I felt the tears burning my eyes. But then came the second part of the truth, the worst, the most unexpected, the most dangerous. She took a deep breath, and her gaze became more serious than at any other moment. "But that's not the only reason I came. It's more serious, much more serious. You need to know something that directly involves you. It took me a long time to understand, but now I'm sure." My heart stopped for a second. She continued, now with a firmer, almost authoritative voice. "He's plotting something, and you're at the center of it." I felt a wave of cold run through my entire body. "I don't know exactly what it is," she said nervously, "but I know it involves money, maybe documents, maybe an important decision he's trying to influence you to sign, maybe something he's done in the past and wants to repeat, with someone else. I know his behavior has changed recently, hasn't it?" I remained silent. But my silence was the answer. She noticed and put both hands to her face, trying to breathe. Then he murmured, "It was exactly like that before he put me in that financial situation that destroyed me. He would be sweet, then cold, then needy, then distant, until I didn't know what to think anymore. I just did what he asked. I became a pawn in his plan. I became a resource. That word, resource, made me nauseous. And then came the emotional trigger, the profound truth, which explains why she appeared there, on that day, at that time. She held my hands, both of them, and said, her voice almost breaking, I couldn't bear the thought of letting another woman go through what I went through. Not for a second. In her eyes there was something that cannot be bought, taught, or faked. The authority of someone who has experienced it firsthand. Survivor's authority. The authority of those who know the monster without the mask. She took a deep breath before continuing. I know who he really is. I've seen who he becomes when he wants something. I know how far he'll go. And when I realized you were starting to change, that you were becoming more anxious, more insecure, more worried about small things, I saw myself. I saw my story repeating itself. And I couldn't. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. She squeezed my hand tightly. I came because you need to be prepared. Because he's hiding something. Something big. Something that involves you. And if you don't find out about it now, you could pay a high price. A very high price. My whole body went into a state of alert. Each of her words plunged deeper. Emotional risk, psychological risk, financial risk, real risk. And then she finished, with the phrase that completely changed the atmosphere in the room, the narrative of the story, and the audience's understanding. I came because he's not just deceiving you. He's deceiving you both. There's something else going on, something you don't know yet, and that can change your life. The ultimate truth had not been told, but now, for the first time, I was certain I needed to hear her out. And everything I thought was my life, my marriage, my security, my love, was about to be challenged by something much bigger. Something was coming, quickly, inevitable. When she said I was at the center of something bigger, something he was hiding, I felt my whole body silently collapse. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't visible despair. It was something deeper, almost invisible, the internal collapse of feeling that, suddenly, I no longer knew where I was stepping, as if the ground had dissolved and I was suspended in the void, not knowing if I was going to fall or if I was already falling. The room seemed smaller, the air felt heavier, the walls seemed closer, as if they were staring at me, waiting for my reaction. I couldn't say anything. Nothing. It was as if my voice had been ripped out. Inside, however, a brutal storm was brewing. A chaotic mix of shock, anger, fear, confusion, disbelief, and a kind of sadness I had never felt before. A sadness not of loss, but of revelation. I felt my heart pounding, almost painfully, and then, for the first time, a thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. What if everything I've experienced was a lie? That sentence pierced me. It instilled itself in my mind with a violence I wasn't prepared to face, because until then, I had been trying to reason in a linear fashion. She told me something. I processed it. I suffered. I understood. But that sentence, she wasn't being logical. It was existential. My entire life was being called into question. I looked at her, but it was as if I were looking right through her. My mind was far away, replaying memories like scenes from a movie being rewound in reverse. And as I reviewed each moment, each conversation, each gesture, each argument, each smile, something terrible began to happen. The pieces no longer fit together. The scenes changed in meaning, and what once seemed normal now seemed suspicious. The first image that came to mind was from the beginning of our relationship. That charm, that magic, that feeling that I had found the right man. But now, how much of that charm was genuine? How much performance was it? How much of it was strategy? Then came the little fights. The times he made me feel guilty for questioning something simple. The times he said I was too sensitive. There were times when the tables turned so quickly that I barely realized I was being manipulated. Now, everything had a different color, another texture, another burden. I remembered nights when he would arrive different. Not distant, but disconnected. And I always thought it was stress, or tiredness, or problems of the day. But now I didn't know anymore. I remembered conversations that ended abruptly, always with justifications that were too perfect, answers that were too quick. I remembered times when he would say that he didn't want to talk about the past because it hurt. I remembered times when he would get weird when I brought up topics that now clearly had holes in them. And then came even more disturbing memories. Messages deleted by mistake, inconsistent schedules, stories that didn't hold up, apologies that I accepted to avoid conflict. exaggerated praise precisely on the days when I suspected something was wrong. And each memory was like a candle being extinguished in a dark hallway. I kept erasing them one after another until I realized that I was almost in total darkness. I started breathing too fast without realizing it. My vision got a little blurry. The ex-girlfriend noticed. "Breathe," she whispered. "It's always like this at the beginning." I know. I closed my eyes, but closing my eyes didn't help. On the contrary, it made my mind project even more vivid scenes, mixing past and present, facts and doubts. It was like trying to distinguish what was true and what was invention. And the scariest thing was this: how much of my marriage was real and how much was construction. Because now I needed to consider the possibility that his love may have been manipulation, his care may have been control, his fragility may have been a strategy, his problems may have been excuses, and her flaws may have been my own truths. I felt the anger rising, slowly, like a hot poison. How could he involve me like that? How could he turn her story against her? And now you're going to do the same to me? It was anger, yes, but it was also shame. Because I felt stupid, blind, naive, ridiculous. But above all, I felt deceived. And this is a type of pain that doesn't burn on the outside. It burns on the inside. It is a silent, lonely, humiliating pain. The pain of realizing you were loved by someone who may not even exist in the way you imagined. My thoughts were racing so fast I couldn't keep up. What if it was all a lie? What if he never loved me? What if he only needed me for something? What if I was just another piece of the puzzle? What if I was just a repeat? What if it was all right in front of me all along, and I didn't see it? And then, as if my own mind were betraying me, the worst thought of all arose: what if he's still lying now? Because the scariest truth isn't knowing that someone lied yesterday. It's not knowing if that person is still lying today. Now, right now. I finally opened my eyes. She was still there, looking at me with a mixture of understanding and sadness. The sadness of someone who knows exactly what's going on in my heart, because they've felt the same. And then, in a voice weaker than I could have imagined, I murmured, I don't know what's true anymore." She held my hands, this time firmly. "I know. I've reached that point too. And that's the most dangerous thing, because it's precisely when you start to doubt yourself that he has the most power over you." My tears fell silently. These were not tears of despair. They were tears of realization. The perception of the beginning of the end, from the fall of the glass castle, from the shattering of illusion. And at that moment, I knew that the story was about to take a major turn, a turning point I never imagined I would experience. Because when a woman finally asks, "What if everything I've experienced has been a lie?" she's not just doubting the relationship. She is doubting reality itself. And that, for any human being, is the beginning of an internal battle, a battle from which no one emerges unchanged. That question, what if everything I've experienced has been a lie? It didn't just echo inside me. It transformed into something bigger, deeper, more definitive, as if it had activated a place within me that I didn't even know existed, a place where naivete dies and lucidity is born, where the victim gives way to the protagonist, where fear gives way to courage, even if that courage comes trembling. I sat there for a few minutes, facing it, feeling every little piece of my life rearrange itself, as if someone had knocked over my bookshelf of memories, and I was forced to pick everything up from the floor, piece by piece, assessing what still made sense and what should never have been there. The shock was still present, anger too, but something new emerged, something I hadn't felt until that moment. Clarity, a harsh, cold, unsettling clarity, but liberating. I took a deep breath, for the first time since she started talking, and felt my body slowly returning to its place. Not completely, because a part of me had been torn away, but enough for me to start thinking differently. Up until then, I had been carried away by events. Now I needed to lead them. I looked at her and said, in a voice firmer than I thought I was capable of at that moment, "I need to know everything. All. No filters." She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. But at that moment, something changed inside me. It was no longer about what she had to say. That was what I needed to find out. I realized I couldn't simply accept someone's truth and don't continue living under someone else's lie. I needed my own truth. And then, for the first time that chaotic afternoon, I felt a decision being born within me. A decision that brought me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. I told her, without hesitation, "I'm going to Confront him. The sentence came out strongly. Safe. She was filled with a courage that even scared me. But that wasn't all. I knew that confronting him head-on could be emotionally, and perhaps even psychologically, dangerous, because manipulators are masters at twisting reality until you doubt yourself. I needed to be prepared. I needed proof. I needed to go beyond emotion. I needed to investigate. And that's when my attitude changed completely. I started asking myself questions I wouldn't have even dared to think about before. What did he hide? Which messages did he delete? Which conversations did he forget to mention? Which documents have I never seen? What lies did he tell so casually that I mistook them for the truth? It was as if a new version of me, more alert, more strategic, had awakened. I got up from the sofa, went to my room and grabbed my cell phone. My ex-girlfriend watched me silently, understanding exactly what was happening inside me. I sat on the edge of the bed and started opening the conversations. From him to me, him with his family, old prints, messages that I didn't even remember anymore. And the more I read, the more I realized there were gaps, holes, strange jumps, phrases taken out of context, faded fragments that previously didn't catch my attention, but now seemed to scream. Right after that, I went to the computer. Aubrey emails, files, pasta by pasta, browsing history, notes, all. I felt like someone who was investigating not her husband, but a stranger who shared her bed. And as I investigated, my mind kept returning to a single phrase. He's plotting something. I didn't know exactly what, but she was determined to find out. I started opening up old conversations of ours, those long ones full of declarations of love, plans for the future, promises that seemed sincere at the time. And for the first time, I saw hidden patterns between the lines, patterns that I had never noticed before, but that now jumped out from the texts, phrases used to create guilt, always giving praise after a fight, pre-prepared justifications for certain absences, emotional details used at the most convenient moments for him, minor manipulations that were now obvious. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't just pain anymore. It was outrage. It was determination. I looked at myself in the mirror, phone in hand, and realized I wasn't crying anymore. I was awake. My ex entered the room slowly, as if afraid to interrupt me. I looked up at her, and for the first time since the beginning of our conversation, she smiled. A slight, satisfied smile, the kind you see another woman getting back on her feet after being knocked down for a long time. "What are you going to do?" she asked in a soft tone. I took a deep breath and replied, "Whatever is needed." That sentence came out so naturally that it surprised me. Everything that is needed. Confront, demand answers, gather evidence, to talk to those who needed to, seek legal counsel if necessary, to protect my name, my money, my emotional state, my story, and above all, to protect myself from his version. I knew the battle ahead would be difficult, possibly cruel, tiresome, but I also knew that I couldn't go back. Not after everything I've heard, not after everything I've seen, not after what I felt. And at that moment, a truth became firmly established within me. I wasn't going to let her story become mine, and I wasn't going to let his future continue to be built on my blindness. For the first time since it all began, I felt something akin to strength, a quiet force, Madura, affected, but resolute. My ex came closer and put her hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone," she said. "I'm here." And I replied, finally understanding the role I was supposed to play in this story. "I know, but now I know I can do it." There, amidst open messages, documents on the table, and an injured woman looking at me with solidarity, I realized I had stopped being a spectator, and even hurt, even confused, even devastated. I had become the protagonist of my own truth. After she left and the door closed behind her, the whole house seemed to fall into a different kind of silence. Not the empty silence of before, but a full silence, full of stirred memories, revealed truths, exposed pain, and above all, decisions made. A silence that didn't hurt, but weighed heavily. It weighed heavily like the awareness of something you can no longer ignore. It weighed heavily like the kind of truth that changes you from the inside. I sat there in the room for a long time, in the same position, staring at the envelope with the documents, the printed messages, the audio files open on my phone. Each item seemed to carry a part of my story that I still needed to understand, accept, integrate. It was as if pieces of my marriage had been ripped away and placed on the table, forcing me to see what I didn't see or didn't want to see. And for the first time, I understood something I never had the courage to admit. Sometimes, the truth comes from the last person we expect, not by close friends, not because of the family, not because of those we love, but for that person who, in our minds, represents the past, discomfort, and insecurity. That person about whom we hear distorted stories. That person who may never have had the opportunity to tell us their own side of the story. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of this discovery. Because, on that day, the truth didn't come wrapped in affection or gentleness. She arrived bleeding. She arrived injured. He came trembling. It arrived destroyed, just like her. And this only reinforced another painful but necessary lesson. The danger lies precisely in believing too much in those who never deserved it. Nice words are not character. Promises are not guarantees. Affection is not synonymous with loyalty. And love alone, has never been enough to sustain a lie for very long. I realized that for years, I had placed my emotional security in the hands of someone who knew how to perform better than how to commit. Someone who knew how to construct versions of themselves, perfect versions, sensitive versions, victim versions, each tailored to whoever was listening. And I, like so many other women, confused manipulation with intensity. I confused control with caution. I confused strategy with love. Now, however, with the impact of everything I had heard and seen, I knew I could no longer bear this blindness. I needed to rebuild myself, not as the woman who believed him, but as the woman who finally believed in herself. I rose slowly from the chair, my body still trembling, and went to the mirror. The face that looked back at me was tired. Yes, swollen, red, but there was something different there. A subtle glow, a new firmness in the gaze, a strength I had never noticed before. It wasn't arrogant force, not even vengeful force. It was the strength of someone who had woken up. I touched my own face and, for the first time in a long time, felt proud. Not because I was perfect, far from it, but because I finally had the courage to admit I was deceived, the courage to accept that love can be dangerous when placed in the wrong hands, the courage to acknowledge my vulnerability, courage to protect my truth, and most importantly, courage to start over. I knew my journey from there would be a long one, made of difficult conversations, from honest confrontations, tough decisions, nights spent thinking about details I previously ignored, rebuilding, a reunion with myself. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the journey. I was afraid to stay where I was. I knew the truth had reached me in an unexpected way, through the mouth of the woman I once judged without knowing her. And that same truth, in such a raw form, gave me something I thought I had lost. Freedom. Freedom to see. Freedom to feel. Freedom to question. Freedom to choose. For myself. Freedom from being just a pawn in someone else's game anymore. I don't know yet how this story will end. I don't know what the confrontation will be like. I don't know what his reaction will be. I don't know what I'll discover when I dig deeper. But I know one thing. I am no longer the same woman who opened that door today. Something in me has changed. Something broke, yes, but something was born. And as I walked to the table to collect the papers, I felt that each step was a small victory. Every piece of evidence, every word she said, every memory that returned, all of it was pushing me toward a stronger, more self-aware version of myself. I sat down again, took a deep breath, and let the heavy serenity of that moment embrace me. I looked at all those fragments of my new reality and thought, the truth hurts. But living a lie hurts much more. And in that instant, I made a silent promise to myself. I will rebuild myself. Take it easy. Clearly, that's true. And I will never, again, allow anyone to define my story without me being a part of it. If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more intense stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, would you have believed her or your husband?